Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Rachita, and I'm from the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice. Before we speak on climate finance, the topic of our press conference today, we cannot ignore the violence and injustice unfolding around us. We condemn, in the strongest possible terms, the recent military strikes on Iran by the United States and Israel, an act of aggression that will only lead to more devastation, instability, and loss of life. These attacks are yet another example of how military might is used to silence, dominate, and destroy. The US, which plays the role of bully in global politics, is not only obstructing justice on the world stage, it is also bulldozing any hope for global cooperation inside these very climate negotiations, even though it's not here, and is backed and supported and is led by other global north countries. These global north countries fuel and fund genocide abroad, and inside these halls, they fuel and fund delay, distraction, and denial. While trillions are spent on weapons, wars, and militarized borders, the communities at the front line of the climate crisis and least responsible for it, those losing lives, lands, and livelihood, are still waiting for basic climate finance, which is not aid, which is not charity, but need to be reparations. This is not a negotiation table anymore. It's a rigged game where the rich write the rules, break them with impunity, and demand trust from the rest. Let's be clear. This is not just a failure of finance, it is a failure of multilateralism. What legitimacy can these talks claim when the very governments meant to lead are violating international law, blocking progress, and undermining collective action? The climate crisis demands solidarity, not sanctions. It requires cooperation, not colonialism. Yet we are watching the same governments that fund war and fossil fuels now push false solutions and profit-driven schemes. Instead of delivering public finance owed under the UNFCCC, rich countries are doubling down on carbon markets, private capital, and accounting tricks. This is not finance, it's theft. It's a new wave of carbon colonialism where those least responsible for the crisis are made to sell their futures for someone else's pollution. Today, we are here to say enough. Enough of lies dressed as solutions, enough of privatization disguised as progress. We demand real public grant-based finance delivered not as charity, but as climate debt owed. We will now hear from our panelists who would break down on what is happening inside, how progress is being blocked, and who are the real villains of these climate talks. So we'll begin with Claire Miranda from Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development.
Thank you, Rachita, and I want to disclose that I'm not affiliated with nor supported by any fossil fuel entity. We came to these negotiations with one clear call, and we've been calling for this for the longest time. We've been calling the Global North to deliver climate finance rooted in justice, obligation, and repair. But what we have seen is not leadership. What we've seen for decades, it's sabotage. Here in Bonn, we're again facing a blatant display of power and obstruction. The Global North remains united in blocking progress, and even in its physical absence, the United States continues to coordinate with its allies behind closed doors, dictating terms, dodging obligations, and dragging negotiations into paralysis. From the start of SB62, at the center of this obstruction is their refusal to deliver on Article 9.1, and we don't need to be experts to understand what this means. The Global North simply don't want to meet their obligations. Instead, they hide behind vague talk of mobilizing finance, which is a smokescreen for outsourcing responsibility to the private sector. But we see through the deception. We know that it's cover-up. What they really mean is, let the markets, the private sector, fix what we destroyed, as if the very system that caused the crisis can somehow solve it. As if profit-driven finance, riddled with conditions, with debt and volatility, could ever deliver justice or reparations. Private finance is not climate finance. It is profit-driven, debt-creating, and extractive. It serves the investors, not the people. And private finance is not a solution to fund climate action. It is a tool to extract even more from the Global South, while those responsible for the crisis continue polluting. And the same pattern repeats itself in the Financing for Development process, or the FFD. There too, the Global North waters down the language. They erase references to obligations, even though they are clearly enshrined in international agreements and conventions like the UNFCCC. They block every serious reform, from having a UN debt convention that we hope to institutionalize debt cancellation. They block fair tax rules, to the creation of a democratic financial system. They do this to maintain control, to keep profiting from the multiple crises faced by the Global South. But they don't want accountability. This is not just failure, it's a deliberate strategy. The US and its allies are working to preserve a global order built on violence, extraction, and impunity. They present themselves as peacekeepers and climate champions, while they fund fossil fuels, militarize borders, and arm genocidal regimes. They pour billions and trillions of dollars into weapons for Israel, fueling genocide in Gaza, and then come to these climate spaces claiming they can't afford climate finance. They bomb schools and hospitals, killing thousands of children, displace communities, destroy ecosystems, then pretend to be the solution. As civil society organizations and movements engaged in this struggle for years, we will reiterate our demands, and we will continue raising them until they are met. First, we demand them to deliver Article 9.1 with no delays, no dilution. It's a legal obligation and a payment to the climate debt owed to the Global South. We demand debt cancellation, not exchange for carbon credits, not to be counted as climate finance, but to liberate public budgets suffocated by colonial theft and neoliberal control, so the Global South can invest in real climate solutions. We need to shut down the lie that private finance and carbon markets are solutions. They are weapons. They are tools used to profit from disaster, deepen the inequality, and evade responsibility. We also demand the demilitarization of public funds. We don't want more weapons. We don't want more fossil fuel subsidies. No more war machines. Public money must go to what sustains life, and that is climate action and reparations. And we need to dismantle the financial system as we know it. We demand a new global architecture that is democratic, just, built by the Global South, and not imposed on the Global South. We are not the problem. We did not create this crisis. We are the ones enduring its worst impacts, and we are the ones facing floods, droughts, displacement, and destruction, all caused by centuries of colonial plunder, carbon emissions, and corporate greed. So it is right, it is just, and it is long overdue that those who caused this crisis be the ones to pay for it. Not with shortcuts, not with schemes, but with real, public, grant-based climate finance, with reparations, with systemic change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. We'll now hear from Meena Raman from Third World Network.
I also wish to declare that the Third World Network does not have any conflict of interest with any fossil fuel industry or emissions-heavy industries. Just to say that I echo the strong voices of all my colleagues here. It's actually very surreal sitting in this space while there's bombing going on outside. And when you have the big powers actually blatantly disregard international law, and some of them come here, and those governments who actually, in the Western world, who come inside these halls and talk about human rights, is absolutely dubious. So what do you mean by human rights when you disrespect international law and international instruments which call governments to account? Now, there's a lot of complicity going on. So for those of us who come here, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement are internationally legally agreed instruments. But what is obvious is that we can't trust these governments who have made these agreements. As has been pointed out, when you have Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement say that developed countries shall provide finance for mitigation and adaptation to developing countries, it cannot be any more clearer. It is as plain English would say, it's a clear obligation. It's not aid, it's not charity, and this is rooted from the historical responsibility that when the Rio Declaration and the Rio Summit happened, that was the recognition. So this is not, sometimes we from the Global South, when we come here, we often feel like we are beggars. We are not begging. We are here to demand that these legal obligations be met due to the historical emissions that have been emitted, and today our countries are either drowning and are embroiled in fires, or our coastlines are disappearing, and this is not due to our historical responsibility. So that's why when we come here and you hear the European Union, the Australians, and the Umbrella Group, and all of them talking about, oh, we need 1.5 aligned nationally determined contributions, to us, it rings hollow. Now, first of all, the emissions coming from war have not even been counted. How on earth are we going to limit temperature rise to 1.5 when you have all the bombs that Israel and the United States have been exploding with extreme delight that their bombs and military equipment and their cluster bombs and so on, the whatever machinery is so wonderful and a display of arrogance and you know, pretends that this is right. So this might cannot be right. So when we talk about these governments who actually are complicit in saying 1.5 degree aligned NDCs, many of the developing country nationally determined contributions and their national adaptation plans are premised on public finance, grants-based, not loans which are to be repaid back. Yes, we accept that for mitigation, there can be deeply concessional loans, which can be paid back, but not adaptation, not for loss and damage, not especially by those who are already in a huge financial debt crisis. So if you want to save the world, don't come and tell us that you have to do it yourself, because that's what we hear in the rooms. You do it yourself. You enable environments to attract the private sector, who for the longest time have not been coming because they don't see any profit from adaptation, from loss and damage. Maybe they will see some profit to be made from renewable energy and so on, but it has to be deeply affordable and deeply concessional in terms of returns. So we are here in a moment where instead of real multilateralism, real international cooperation, we are seeing a total dismantling of all the agreements that have been agreed to. So you see in every hall, adaptation, national adaptation plan, global goal and adaptation, mitigation work program, you do it yourself. This is not a do-it-yourself COP in Belém. It has to be premised on public finance and ending the fiscal constraints of developing countries and ensure that real money is delivered. We cannot accept any more excuses that's no money when bombs and military expansion is so obvious, and fossil fuel expansion is also very obvious in the north. So stop the duplicity, stop the falsehood, enough is enough, and we urge the people of the global north, we urge the people of the global north to stand up to your governments and say, this cannot be in your name. So enough is enough. If you do not do that, this complicity and dubiousness will continue. So we appeal to the solidarity of the global north and our peoples there to stand in solidarity with us so that there's real hope for this world before we have this chaos to go into complete destruction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meena, for presenting all of that analysis. We'll now hear from our next speaker, Analia dos Santos from Shifters Campaign.
My name is Analia Schleger dos Santos. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the so-called United States, and I state that I have no affiliation with any fossil fuel interests whatsoever. I do all things youth and global environmental justice at Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. I'm a member of both the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice and U.S. Climate Action Network, and I'm here because I'm encouraging my fellow comrades in the U.S. to demand that our country stop destroying any and all progress on international climate action, the continuation of occupation, colonization, colonialism, and bullshitting every single facet of civilization and humanity at every possible opportunity, and begin to actually do its fair share. I get the honor of leading initiatives in the U.S. called Shift Us and Climate Reparations Camp, both centered on normalizing the fair shares framework of addressing climate action and focusing on a reparatory framework. This calls for us to first accept that we have positioned ourselves to be the largest historical emitters, largest producers of fossil fuels, and the country with one of the largest inherent and historical responsibility to stop causing harm and drastically repair the damage we've done. Yet every day, I hear us moving further and further in the opposite direction. Year in and year out, we engage in games alongside other global north countries, strategically and embarrassingly avoiding every opportunity to do the right thing, dodging the requests and demands of all global south parties that we have already exploited for labor, resources, and power. We got to pat ourselves on the back by getting out of the way of the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund and letting it be set up. And then we got away with doing nothing to ensure its functionality, telling people back home that it couldn't have been done without our leadership. What a joke. We could have made a historical step in the right direction by contributing something that could be substantive enough to make a difference for the lives and livelihoods we have stolen from the Global South. We could have begun to make reparations and restore the communities we've decimated. And we figured, better not. Why don't we expand fossil fuels and throw 10 cents on a useless dollar to the Loss and Damage Fund? Because who is going to make us do anything when we have put ourselves at the center of everything that happens on this planet? We consistently purport that we don't have the money nor the political will to do our fair share and contribute to the fund, and yet we waste billions on wars we don't need to be fighting, buying new toys and weapons for our militaries, and padding the pockets of billionaires with money from communities that will never see a return on the investments that have taken everything from us. And so, the rest of the globe is left underserved and infantilized by global north greed. We still have the audacity to call for you all to be more ambitious and to try harder. It is a sick game that must end. Reparations will never be enough for the harms caused, but it is an imperative pathway to harm repair at a global scale. One way we can begin to repair is to make a call from the most ridiculous, selfish, global north country to all other global north countries to fill the fund, and quickly, or we as a global community will find whatever method we can to reallocate resources that we put in to make these governments run. And we will protect our relatives in whatever way we have to. This is not a threat, it is a promise. We the people outnumber these puppet masters, making a mockery of frameworks of international collaboration 1,000 to 1. We must become relentless in this fight, and I implore parties in the global north to take heed. The time has come and gone for countries to accept and do their fair share to address the climate crisis and compound crises. The time has come not only for us to participate in actualizing real solutions that are based in community and right relation, it has come time for us to humbly accept the narrative that we have set out for ourselves and change the future narrative for us and our relatives for the next 7 generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Analia. We'll now open up the floor for any questions.
Larry Moffat with the Press Club Brussels Europe. A question for Analia. At COP29, US states and cities were present under the banner America is all in, promising that despite what the Trump administration would do, that progress was still going to be made at state and city level. But the onslaught from Trump is so strong, pressuring states to stop, whatever they're doing on renewable energy, on emission standards. California recently just rolled back some of their standards. I don't know how it is in Minnesota, but could you comment on that? What's your perspective? Thanks.
So, not sure if folks have been hearing, but we have insane suppression happening back at home. Something that we are experiencing right now is a threat. It passed the House, and I cannot remember the name of the bill right now, but they call it the nonprofit killer bill. So essentially, if you have stood up for any kind of justice in the past, present, whatever, the administration is essentially saying that they can classify you as a terrorist organization, which you would lose your nonprofit status. So the constraints that we're experiencing are ridiculous, and so it's really calling for us as citizens and civil society to be as creative as possible to figure out how to still do our fair share. Minnesota passed 100% renewable energy by 2035, I think 2 years ago, and so I'm not quite sure how those constraints are affecting that process. Our governor is pretty committed, as he says, but every day the constraints are growing. And so I think that it's either pushing people in the U.S. to retreat in fear, because at every turn there's some new bill. It's like something's announced every day, which we're trying to make a plan for and be strategic about, but then it calls for us to come back to the drawing board, it feels like every week. It's either causing people to retreat out of fear or really radicalizing people. We're also seeing a lot of our relatives that are from immigrant communities be really victimized and terrorized in this deportation ridiculousness that we're experiencing. And so it really feels like we're playing the game and they're having us be distracted by everything that we're seeing. So it's calling for states to be creative, but I would really encourage folks to consider that the way the U.S. is set up is that states are kind of governing themselves, so we're really fighting at every level of everything in the U.S., local and national, to stand our ground and to figure out what we can do. We're ran right now by an administration that doesn't think climate change is real. So it kind of feels like every initiative is being put into a box. So I think it's either gonna have to get real scrappy, as they say, and things are gonna have to change very quickly, or I don't know. Every day we're kind of confused, but really trying to be as strategic as possible. And it's really important for us that are here, for example, to be leaning into relationship with all of you. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Analia. Any other question from the floor? Okay, so if you don't mind, I have 2 questions. So Meena, if you could just reflect a little on and share on how there has been increasing push for privatization through false solutions like carbon markets. And then for you, Claire, if you can also help share like how any fight for climate finance is closely tied with international financial architecture, and then what our movements are doing this week to push against that. So first Meena, and then Claire can close.
Yeah, first of all, as Claire said, carbon finance or carbon markets is not climate finance. Because first of all, let me explain what that is. Carbon markets are basically for trading pollution permits, so that those parties, particularly in the global north, for instance, a lot of the nationally determined contributions we understand of the governments of the north contained a huge amount of carbon offsets. So what they are saying is, we cannot reduce emissions in our country, so we will trade permits in the developing world by them financing the developing world to reduce the emissions for them by forest protection or by other means, so that the carbon credits generated will be sold to the global north. So what in effect this means is that the developing world is helping the global north not only to reduce the emissions, but also to say whatever forests that we have and in our own space, we will not use them to count to our emissions reductions. So it's a double counting of one, for what they do in terms of, or not do in terms of emission reductions, and then to count that money that they have given to the developing world as finance, that is really dubious, because you're double counting. Now, for a lot of the developing world, unfortunately, there are many governments who are very desperate for finance. So what they are doing is engaging with some of these particularly voluntary carbon markets that we are seeing even in my own country, in Malaysia, where the indigenous peoples and the local community territories are being infringed upon. The customary rights of these communities are up for grab. So you have logging companies and other companies from not only the global north, but even in our own countries, coming in to say that whatever forest protection you have done, we will generate the carbon credits. The protection is done by the community. The carbon credits is being generated and sold, and they get the money. So it's an absolutely con game and a sham. First, it doesn't reduce emissions, because like I said, there's no such thing as offsetting. Imagine, like, when we fly on airlines, you fly and you say, oh, my emissions will be offset by a planting of a tree in Kenya. It doesn't work that way in terms of real terms. So it's really a false solution. And so on top of that, to actually grab, this is actually what we say is a new form of land grab and forest grab, which actually impinges on the territories of communities and indigenous peoples. That's why we keep fighting. So carbon finance, it's not climate finance, it's a dubious, false solution, which we must actually not engage in.
Thank you, Rachita. So as I've said earlier, it is quite frustrating, especially us who have been calling for climate finance for decades already. And same also for others in different spaces where they engage with the international financial institutions or the MDBs. The MDBs who have imposed on the Global South these financial mechanisms that didn't actually benefit us, but buried us deep in debt. So this year, movements from all these spaces are saying enough. We need to dismantle this system that they created, and in different international spaces, we're doing that. So just also to share to everyone that from here in Bonn, we're doing the SBs, but there's also another parallel process happening in a few weeks in Seville during the Financial for Development mechanism. Movements are also saying the same, calling the Global North out because of their hypocrisy, their lies. We are demanding them to pay up, to pay reparations, and change the system. So we're doing that not only here in Bonn, in Seville, but also throughout the rest of the year during key moments. We need to unite together, come together, and share the same demands and cause, and be as loud as possible so that these Global North governments who feel that they have the power will be challenged and know really that it is the people who has the power.
Okay. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing all of that. Before we close, I just want to share that as movements from the South, as movements on the ground, as movements from the front line, we'll continue standing in solidarity with Palestine, Sudan, Congo, and Iran, and every other place that is being oppressed, colonized, or has genocide unfolding, despite all the restrictions and censorship that is being imposed on us arbitrarily as civil society inside UNFCCC by the UNFCCC Secretariat. We will not be silenced. We will keep raising our voices. We will keep demanding justice. Please continue joining us for our daily press conference here every day at 10 a.m. See you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.